Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSP Magazine. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
And here we go. Sean, you join up me today. That's great.
I ditched my parka and joined you on audio signal for once in a long time.
Very, very good. And for people...
You probably wondered what the parka is. I had my parka hat on. I don't have the jacket, just the hood.
You just walk around the house with that.
That's right.
At least your head.
Just the parka hood.
Yeah, if you keep your head warm, I think you're fine. Now, for those listening to the podcast, we're also on video. You can join us on YouTube channel. And Sean, he showed up, looked like a bear. So we were wondering if he was in the tundra somewhere or in Patagonia. And the other person you see, if you're watching the video, is Tom Eston. Tom, how are you?
Hey, I'm great. Great to be on the show with you guys. It's exciting.
Oh, we are excited, and this is episode number 3 of this kind of like passion, work of passion that I had an idea of talking with other podcasters. What's the experience, why we do what we do. We can dig into some of the tech, some tips and advice from people that have been doing it for a while, and even for people that just get started and they can tell me why they're doing it or so. So Sean and I, we've been doing this for a while, but Tom, you've been doing it for longer than us, actually, in terms of the actual podcasting, because we started as a written publication, and then we're like, let's do podcasting. So 14 years of podcasting.
14 years, yeah. It's been a long labor of love, as I mentioned to you earlier. It's been great. Honestly, I look back and think about what the podcasting experience has given to me. And I think it's just so much, right? Just from meeting new people and friends and people in the industry. But, it's also benefited my career as well, because I don't think I would be where I'm at in my career if it wasn't for the podcasts that I have.
And that's absolutely true. And this is exactly why we're talking about this. So Sean, how long have you been podcasting?
I don't know. Was it 4 or 5 years now, recording audio stuff? I've been writing stuff for years, probably as long as Tom's been doing podcasts. I think I've been writing maybe even longer than that, but building products before that in cybersecurity. And it's to your point, Tom, I think I'm not out to grow my personal brand necessarily, but understanding the tech space is important to me. And one, I get to kind of poke at people and get them to share some of the things that they know that I don't, or maybe I know enough to be dangerous, but then I also learn probably 5 times as much as I'm having these conversations. And so it's definitely helped in my career, whatever my career is. I have no idea. I don't know what I am. Now that I'm grown up, I have no idea.
Yeah.
But I've packed my brain full of interesting things that come to be fruitful every now and then.
So Tom, let me start with this. A little bit about yourself, not just the podcast. Who is Tom, and also I'm curious. Do you just do podcasting about cybersecurity, or sometimes you just go on, I want to talk about something else? Because I do that. Yeah. That's why we have so many different channels. I just can't talk about the same thing all the time.
Yeah, these are great questions. Great questions. So my name is Tom Eston. I'm the founder and host of the Shared Security Show. I'm doing this for 14 years. A little bit of a backstory of the podcast. It used to be called the Social Media Security Podcast back in 2009 when we started this from a DEF CON talk that I gave with my now co-host, Kevin Johnson, on the security of social networks. And I mean, if you guys remember back then in 2008, 2009, social media was the new thing. I mean, all there was MySpace, right? And Facebook was new, Twitter was new. And so I did a lot of research at the time on security and privacy around social networks. And that's kind of how the podcast started, where we were specifically talking about and interviewing people that were in the social media space, that were doing interesting research about vulnerabilities and exploits and all kinds of things. And then over the years, we just started, to your point, we started talking about other things outside of social media, privacy issues, security vulnerabilities, things in the news that were happening. And so it became more of a general podcast where, today we're talking about really anything related to cybersecurity and privacy, and we're interviewing people that are in the industry and sometimes people outside of the industry to kind of get their perspective on, how do you view security and how do you view privacy? And it's been an interesting journey. So, and then besides that, my day job is I'm currently at Bishop Fox, where I'm the AVP of consulting. So I run our consulting practices for the company. And I've been there for about 3 years. But before that, I was at Veracode. I was leading one of their pen test teams, and I've had various management positions, but as well as a hacker. I've been a hacker my whole life. I was a pen tester. I did all the fun stuff. And now I get to manage people, which is also fun. It's just a little bit different.
It's a different kind of hacking.
Different type of hacking.
Different kind of, it's hacking people. Yeah. Which I think is a lot more challenging than the technical side for sure.
So Tom, I'm interested. Social media hacking and talking about that. And you talked about bringing security people on. You talked about bringing industry people on. How have and obviously you branched out beyond just social media security, but how have the conversations changed? And more specifically, I think what I'm trying to understand is your view on how aware are people generally with the concept of security and privacy, and how has that awareness, or maybe still lack of, if that's the case, changed the conversation over the years?
That's a really interesting question. And my gut reaction to that is that it hasn't changed much. From when I talked to people in 2009 compared to today, we're still talking about the same issues and they have the same concerns. They're just maybe a little bit more or a different kind of context to what we're talking about. Like more recently, everyone's blowing up over AI and ChatGPT and like, all the privacy security concerns with that and AI and things like that. But ultimately, that's still the same conversation at the end of the day that we're having back in 2009 with whatever was new that was coming out, like social media. People were freaking out over that. And as we've seen that evolve and change with the technology, the core concerns of it haven't, right? There's still people's data we're talking about. There's still the human side of the equation that we're still talking about. And the attackers haven't changed at all. They're still trying to steal data. They're still trying to make money. And we haven't really solved that problem. And I don't know if we'll ever solve that problem in security. We could have all these new gadgets and new tech and, blinky boxes, right? Like we've always talked about, that do these amazing things. But at the end of the day, security is a people problem. And that has always been kind of a focus of my conversations with people, is how do we address the people problem? And how do we all get better at security and communicating with each other and those types of things?
So let's talk about that, and let's go back into the podcasting role in all of this, right? I mean, I've studied social media, but I studied media before social media, and what podcasting and the digital era has been giving to people, including YouTube, content creation. Everybody become a content creator, and that's a good thing, and it's also a really bad thing. And we've seen, we've seen that, right? So let's talk about the good thing. And the good thing is that everybody that wants to make a point, wants to participate into the conversation, can do that. Of course, you can do it being a guest, or which is a lot easier. In my opinion, and you can do it in being a host, and can be a lot of fun, and you can change people's mind. You can educate, you can share the knowledge. So I love your feedback from someone who's been for 14 years doing this. How you have seen the scenario changing, the view around outside of your window of all these people coming and going, starting a podcast, dropping the podcast. Has that been a good thing for the industry and also for the podcasting business in general, or not?
Yeah, I think it's been a real positive thing. I mean, like other podcasters, I mean, I listen to podcasts. I listen to quite a few podcasts that have really impacted my life and my career. And I know many of them, or I've been able to interview them and have them on my podcast. And we've shared kind of our own experiences. And I think the content creation, like you mentioned, I mean, the more voices that we have getting out there and talking about the issues that we're dealing with in the industry is a positive thing. On the flip side, I think I've also seen kind of some of the damage that maybe some people in the industry have had a podcast or a YouTube channel, as an example, maybe a little more on YouTube, where maybe they're trying to, tear people down, right? Or they come out against a certain vendor, or they're spewing complete BS, right? That we all know in the industry, that's not true. That's, and it provides them a lot of discredit, but, and they stir up controversy that way. So I'm always trying to stay aware of like, okay, who are the controversial people that maybe I don't want to necessarily interview or, not be part of. And so for me, it's about like, who are the important voices? Maybe who are the voices that don't get much attention? And I've always kind of gravitated more towards those people that, we don't really know who these people are in the industry. They're not big names, but maybe they should be because of the interesting things that they're talking about that is different. So a lot of the people I've interviewed, I've tried to bring more of those people out of the woodwork, so to speak, and give them kind of more of a platform.
Yeah, nice.
And I want to go. So I like what you said about bringing people in that may not have had a voice elsewhere, and now they have a voice. And I've seen some things change over time where, well, certainly pre-pandemic, not everybody was using some web browser to communicate with a team somewhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now it's almost common that somebody knows how to connect. We still get the odd, I have no idea how to connect to your platform and then record a podcast with you.
Right.
But most of the time people can. And so I want to get your perspective on how things have changed in terms of connectivity and equipment and the ability to record high quality, because having somebody say something is one thing, but to be able to hear them clearly and produce that in a way that people want to hear, it's not overblown over, you know what I'm saying? They're not turning up the mic too. So what are your thoughts? I see, I'm not personally on it right this moment, but I see we share the same gear in terms of mic. I have a Procaster as well.
Oh, yes.
So thoughts on kind of some of the changes there to help make the voice listenable.
Yeah, I've got a lot of opinions on that. So I am first and foremost kind of an audio nerd. Like early on in the podcast, I would spend a lot of time tweaking my audio setup and getting it just right, because I listened to a lot of other podcasts about creating podcasts, and they always said audio quality is number one. Like, what is the number one thing that people, the first 10, 15 seconds into a podcast, if you've got bad audio quality, they're going to unsubscribe. They're not going to finish listening to the podcast. Like, it's just a natural thing with people. And I notice it myself. Like, I pick up a new podcast, the first thing I notice is the audio, like before I even get into the content. So if I can hook them with like, oh, wow, this sounds really good, they're hopefully going to continue to listen. And I think over the years, the quality question plus the gear and the technology, it's just gotten so much better. I'm a big fan of, I'm not heard of Dave Jackson, he's a big podcaster guy that does a lot of promotion for new people that are getting into the business. And, I listen to him a lot, and like what his advice are, it's more than just a microphone and having the best quality microphone. You can start with like a cheap Audio Technica, $60 microphone, still get really good audio quality, but then do some other things like, what kind of room are you in? Like, can you narrow down the echoes? Can you just make little tweaks to improve, the quality? Being in a quiet space is huge, right? Turn off the fan. I interview people where they've got a large humming noise in the back. It's like an air conditioner, or, there's always some kind of noise, or even sometimes my co-hosts have, other stuff that is in the background that I got to edit out and things like that.
Have you ever got, this is my
gosh.
3D printer in the back?
Yes. I've had the 3D printer situation. You hear, and it's like, and as an editor, you're like, audio editor, you're like, oh my gosh, this is a nightmare. Like, I'm going to spend hours pulling this stuff out. So, and what I've learned over the years is like, I prep the people that come on the show, right? Like, I give them here's some reminders, please, be in a quiet space, wear headphones, just simple things, right? Because I think we've all been there, right? As podcasters, we've interviewed somebody and just had horrible audio quality, and we're trying to do all these things post, right, to clean it up and make it sound so somebody doesn't freak out when they're listening to this. It's like, wow, that guy's audio is just so bad. Tom's audio is great, but what happened with the guests? And that's all they can think about is the quality of the audio, and not the actual good content that this person was talking about. So yeah,
you can make a parallel here with what it used to be before we were able to do podcasting remotely, and there are great platform there. I'm not going to name it, but the people that are in the industry, they know they can do video and audio of very high quality nowadays, and before you couldn't. But before this, usually when you hear an interview, unless it was a live connection in person, it was in a studio. So you go to a talk show, well, you got people miking you up and an audio engineer. So sometimes I feel like, I don't know, and Sean, you probably, we talked about this, like people come on and they think like, oh, I'm on ITSPmagazine, I'm going to sound amazing. No, you're connecting from your computer. I can't really do anything about it.
Nope.
And you would think by now, you've been on several podcasts to actually understand at least the minimum. You can't ask people to spend thousands of dollars on. No,
absolutely not.
On that, but at least the minimum, the minimum denominator of, $60 mic could work.
Oh yeah,
absolutely, just can make a huge difference. Yeah,
and
even a $15 headset.
Yes, that's all. It's all you need. I've had great audio from even iPhone headphones, right? But better than the microphone on your computer is not good enough. Like that is just that's the one thing I could tell people. If you're coming on a podcast, just get a basic mic or put iPhone headphones in or something. It's going to be better quality than your laptop speaker or your microphone.
Absolutely.
So let me ask you this: is it possible to overdo it? I know Marco's answer on this, because early on we would do a lot of on location podcasts, namely at RSA and Black Hat and DEF CON. We'd bring people together, and I have an audio unit that takes 8 mic inputs, and I'd hook up 8 wireless lapel mics, and we'd head off onto the show floor and the hallways, and I had giant cameras early on as well, where we were recording videos using giant cameras with big lenses and everything. And Marco was always like, "It's too much." I enjoyed it. But there was the you have to lug all this stuff around to capture it all, and then to your point on even just the audio quality, putting all that together and producing it all became a real pain.
That stuff went in Singapore too. I remember very well.
We drug it
your
to Singapore.
Backpack.
Wow.
I'm like, I'm not carrying that thing. I'm not carrying that thing.
We did some really cool stuff with multiple angle shots and high quality audio, because people had mics connected to them. But your thoughts on overdoing it? Is it possible to overdo it?
Absolutely. Totally. I can tell you that I've gotten less detailed in my post editing. I've kind of, after 14 years, you kind of learn like, what's the fastest way that I can do this? to get my podcast out, because I have to both edit the audio and the video. I mean, I've done things like where, I was recording my audio through a mixer to a Zoom H4n, basically hand recorder, and then I would edit the audio off of that. But over time, now that we use something like StreamYard, we use Zencaster, very similar. That records the audio of myself and all the guests. I literally don't even hardly do any editing anymore. I will actually take the mix, and the technology has allowed me to do all the leveling, the noise gating, all of that within the Zencaster app. So that's less post I have to do. And if I have to do any editing, like somebody coughs or something like that, yeah, sure, I'll go in there and edit that out. But I cut my post editing time pretty much in half by accepting maybe a little, noise or, little things that before I was just very anal about. Like I was like, I got to have perfect audio. And over time, I realized you can get it good enough. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. People will still listen as long as, of course, you have good content. But, good audio quality, it varies according to whoever you ask, right? They're going to have all a different opinion. And for my audience, at least, they're not all audiophiles listening and scrutinizing I don't get feedback and like, wow, that audio is kind of off, Tom. I'm like, what do you mean it was off? It's the same. It's always been I get more of like, I actually get better feedback of like, hey, it was a really interesting guest that you had on. And, to me, that's the feedback I'd rather get.
But, I think it's so true. We've gone through the same thing. Right. I mean, if you at least come in with a decent setting, and then all the post-production, even when you just upload it to your hosting, it already get some kind of of a leveling, and then you can use, really good, Audition or Zencaster, or I mean, even GarageBand, if you can handle that, because that's not easy, by the way.
Yeah.
But I agree. I mean, better to create better content and have a decent amount, because what is okay for you is going to be amazing for most people. When you're too much into something, it's kind of like the same thing with Sean. I know why I asked that, because he wants to hear, that you can't overdo it. But I think you can. I mean, sure, if I'm BBC and I have, a team of editors and producer and sound engineers, and they're going to put special effect and everything, well, great. I'll make a dramatization of every podcast, but
your time is back.
Sorry, I remember back to it may have been one of the first, if not the first, that I ever did, and I was really excited. It was a great conversation. It was about security and privacy in the healthcare space 10 years ago, whatever, 8 years ago when we started, and it was amazing. I mean, it was exactly what I hoped to get in terms of content from a conversation. I got in there and started editing, and I don't know, I cut maybe a 35-minute episode down to 25 minutes, cutting spaces and pauses and things like that. I sent it to the guests. They're like, what the hell did you do?
This isn't the same interview. What happened?
This isn't the same interview. It sounds really rushed and weird.
Yeah.
I don't want it to go out. And I'm like, damn. So I turned it into a written piece, capturing the story, which we started as a written publication. But that was a case for me where it was way overdone. It didn't sound natural. The guest didn't recognize himself. And huge learning lesson for me. I don't know if you have any experiences.
I do. I actually got a few stories. So I mean, I'd likely any podcast has been around for a while. We get positive feedback, and sometimes we do get negative feedback. And the negative feedback that I've gotten, I've had one where early on in the podcast, somebody commented on Twitter that, your podcast is great, but there's a lot of dead air between you and the co-hosts. And this was before I was really getting into audio editing and things like that. And it made me realize, like, I listened back to the episode and I'm like, holy crap, there is a lot of dead air. I'm like, why am I not cutting this out? And it was something I just had overlooked at the time. And, that for me was good feedback. I'm like, he was right. I had dead air. I'm going to change my editing around that. The other feedback I've gotten is around ad placement. And that's a very controversial one, right? Because we know ads and the sponsors, at least that I have for my show, I support those sponsors. I actually believe in what they do and their products. And so I'm not going to put an ad in my podcast that I don't necessarily believe in, like what they do. And so I'm very careful of where I place that ad. But some people just like, I gotten feedback like, I hate it when you put ads at the beginning of the podcast. I just fast forward through them. Like, okay, great. I'm glad you do that, because at least you're getting to the content and you're still listening to the episode. But I have other people that says, oh, you got ads in your podcast? I'm not going to listen to you guys. Like, why would you put ads? It means it's sponsored, and you're being biased, right, towards your sponsors. And I'm like, no, guys, like, I'm just, it's helping pay the bills, right? And I do believe like content creators should be paid for the work that they're doing, right? It takes a lot of time and effort, and it's not something that's easy to produce. So if you want, I try to support people that I follow on Patreon and others. And I think that's important. So the ad question, I've just gotten some, negative feedback about that. So I'm just careful where I place the ads. But at the end of the day, you're not going to make everybody happy, right? It's like, hey, if you don't like the ads, then don't listen to the podcast. That's fine. But, find me a podcast that is really good and you really like, that doesn't have ads. There's podcasts I listen to.
Are you not going to watch the Super Bowl because they're ads?
Right.
Are you not going to buy the New York Times or anything else? Or are you going to pay for the highest pro subscription on Netflix so you don't get the damn ads? So, I mean, people need to understand that this is a job for a lot of people. And even if it's not a job, as you said, I know how much it costs your setting there, at least what I can see. So just to run that, somebody got to say, hey, you're doing a good job. I'm either paying for your product or I'm going to have to listen to the.
So some of the things I've done is like, I've put in, so I had some feedback of like, could you put in some kind of noise or something? So I know when, like I have these flames, this flame sound that comes in that, in the mid roll, right? To notify somebody that, hey, an ad's coming. And hey, if you're going to fast forward it, great. Just hit the 30-second or 20-second skip button and that's fine. You're back to the show. But I always try to, at least let my listeners know that, hey, we've got an ad, or I actually personally like say, hey, we'll be right back. We have our advertiser has sponsored this episode. Thank them very much, but I've learned to kind of build that in, but also be very tactful about it at the same time. Because I want to be respectful of my listeners' time. Like, I don't want to have I get annoyed too. And I have like a podcast I like listening to, in the first 5 minutes, it's nothing but ads. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, like here's another one. And
you
another
got a
one.
balance,
like,
right?
But what's the balance? Right.
Yeah. I agree.
Yep.
I agree. You know what I would like to, if somebody's thinking to start podcasting tomorrow, and I know there is a lot of people, because we have now, I don't even know, 20, 25 contributors or people that have their own show, and it takes a little bit of thinking, and sometimes again is a balance, right? So is the barrier too high for me? Even if you commit for, let's talk about frequency, for example, twice a month, once every week, what maybe once a month, maybe a little too little, in my opinion. I'd love to hear yours, but also the cost of entry, the entry level of, do I need to spend $1,500 on a setting for a mic? Do I need to do all of these? Or, what are your tips to someone that wants to start?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so my advice is to, so the biggest thing is consistency. I think with podcasting is, if you're going to commit to a monthly podcast, commit to a monthly podcast. If you skip a month or 2 or 3 months or whatever, that's where listeners are just not, they're going to stop listening because you're not consistent, right? Same thing on the day that you release the podcast. We always release ours at midnight on Mondays. So our listeners come to expect that Monday morning, I'm going to have a new podcast from the Shared Security Show. And I know I can expect that that's going to happen. And if it doesn't, for some reason, let's just say you've got an emergency, or, your house like flooded, or, some crisis, right? And you can't get the episode out, communicate to your listeners. Just send out, a tweet or whatever it is that your show follows you on, and say, hey, I missed this week. We're going to be back next week. So you're kind of communicating to your audience like that expectation, right? That I'm being consistent with my content, and I'm going to be whatever that frequency is, they get used to that. And that's kind of how you gain those followers. And then in terms of equipment, I would say, like we talked about already, right? You don't have to spend a whole ton of money. I mean, you could literally start with your laptop and your iPhone headset if you want. It's not going to be the total best quality, but at least it'll be something. But that's where you need to focus on your content. And I would say focus more on your content than the actual equipment and all the technology, right? That's the kind of thing that comes later. And honestly, I spend probably, sometimes a couple hours, depending on like who I'm bringing on the show, researching them, really detailing out kind of those questions that I want to ask and really prepping for the episode. So like the stories we talk about every week on the show, like I'll spend time research those stories, take notes, summarize them, that kind of thing. Maybe it's a little bit easier now with like something called ChatGPT. Maybe we could talk about that another time, but really,
I'd love to talk about that.
Yeah.
I use it. I'm not gonna lie.
I think we're all using it in some way to help make our jobs a little more easier, a little more efficient. And so doing things like that can have huge benefits. And the other thing I would say too is when you're interviewing somebody, or you're thinking about interviewing somebody, there is a tendency in the industry, I think, of like some imposter syndrome of like, like take Philip Wiley as an example, like, oh crap, that's Philip Wiley. I can't interview him. I can't talk to him. He's like this big name out there, right? And it's like everybody's approachable, right? If you just send an email or a tweet,
Philly's the nicest guy.
He's a totally nicest guy, right? But a lot of people get intimidated by people in the industry of like, oh, they would never talk to me. I'm nobody. I'm like, you'd be surprised. Like I've reached out to people that even I was like starstruck with and had great conversations with. And they're like, yeah, I'd love to come on your podcast. That'd be great. Like, so don't be intimidated by people in the industry. Like if there's someone you really want to talk to, just reach out to them and just ask them, hey, you want to come on my new podcast about whatever? Yeah.
And in terms of what you talk about, how much of that is driven by the community, driven by guests, driven by your intrigue in something? Something you're working on, something you read.
Yeah.
How's that mix of that come together for you?
Yeah, kind of a little bit of everything, really. It's usually like what's kind of the hot topic, kind of being talked about in the industry at that time is usually some of it. A lot of it is also the news and what's happening in the news with attacks and kind of things that I see on Mastodon or Twitter and people talking about is something that I might, gravitate towards. But I also look for, like I mentioned earlier, I look for the people that are talking about really interesting things that maybe aren't being talked about by the big people that we always gravitate towards, of the people that get the most follows on Twitter and InfoSec and things like that. And so I kind of look for these voices that are doing something a bit different and maybe makes it a little bit more unique on the show to talk about. And honestly, they may not get like some of those episodes haven't been like my biggest downloads either, but I still feel like those kind of unique and maybe niche topics in cyber are unique enough that they should still warrant an episode, in my opinion. And maybe one day, right? Maybe somebody, and I've had this with a couple episodes, that somebody at 2 years later came out, sends me an email and says, wow, that was a really great interview you did of so-and-so. Like, I didn't even know this person was doing this stuff. And then I followed up and I saw they're doing more things. And so that is like really rewarding when I get an email like that. That's something I did years ago that I just didn't think would have an impact. It made an impact to somebody, even if it's just one person. That email alone just meant like the world to me when I got that. So,
yeah, it reminds me. I'm going to go off topic for still topical, but off topic for a second before asking another question. But we used to host on SoundCloud, and we had an episode that was either identical or very similar to a song name on SoundCloud. And it just so happened.
Well, you can say that. It's not copyright. It was somebody's watching me.
Somebody, I always feel like somebody.
It was about privacy.
It was about privacy, of course.
Yeah.
And of course, SoundCloud, everybody was searching for that. And that was one of our top. Not because of who was on.
That's a good thing.
They talked about.
It's the power of the title.
It is. Oh, that's a big one. Yeah. How you name your podcast episodes. Yep.
That's right.
I've learned that lesson too. Yeah.
So I want to go to next, maybe as we begin to wrap. So Marco's had the luxury of me being absent from the last 2 episodes. So he's
Yes.
unfortunate enough to have me on, interrupt him here and there. I want to get your thoughts on co-host, because you have a co-host.
I have 2 co-hosts. Yeah.
There you go.
Mhm.
So how is that? I mean, I have to deal with Marco. So what's it like working with your co-host?
Oh yeah, my co-hosts are great. We have a really unique kind of chemistry between the 3 of us. So Scott Wright and I, we actually started the podcast together. I've always had a co-host. So Scott is my co-host. He's up in Canada, so we instantly have a lot of U.S. versus Canadian type of jokes and camaraderie together, which you have to, right? Like Canadians are so nice, and us Americans, well, we're Americans, but yeah, so we have that kind of thing going, and he's been great, and he brings another perspective of his background is around security awareness and the non-technical side of security. I've been more on the technical side, so we kind of balance each other out pretty well. So we've always had a good chemistry and good balance. And then the other co-host is Kevin Johnson, who is the complete opposite of both of us. Personality wise, he's very outgoing, like more outgoing than us, but he's kind of the jokester. We just made a comment in the last show. He's like the comic relief of the podcast. So, I have to often, to keep the explicit rating off of the show, I will have to edit, certain things that he says out of the podcast, but it's kind of fun and we have fun with it. And people notice that he's probably the co-host that I get the most comments from about on YouTube and other areas and Reddit. Not always positive either, but again, that's just his personality. So I'm very grateful to have 2 co-hosts that I think add different things to the show. And I think that's important. If you're going to have co-hosts, I think they should be a bit different than you and have, different opinions. And I think that's really important when you're having dialogues about different topics.
I agree. And I'm going to add my own thing that you just said. It's kind of like, even when you cover an important topic, a very serious topic, unless it's super, super serious, a little bit of humor, it helps. I mean, you're there. People are listening to you for half an hour, 40 minutes. And we didn't go in the length of the podcast. Maybe we'll have another episode another time. But, it's kind of like you need that dynamic. And I have to say that we do record a lot of things separately lately, because we have different background, different interests, we're running different shows. But I remember the beginning was kind of weird, but like I was always saying, well, Sean is not with me today, I start something, and I'm like, okay, nobody's backing me up, and then you get used to it, and especially if you have a good guest, it's all good. But that dynamic is really good, and it brings me, I think, to my advice to, if somebody want to hear it, to someone that starts, don't try to be someone else, right? I mean, here we're having a lot of fun, Tom. I think I'm honestly having a good time.
Yeah,
I can see this is you, Sean is Sean. We make a joke, we tell our opinion. And other people, when they start a podcast, they come to me and they're like, well, who should I look? Who should I sound like? Who should I be inspired by? I'm like, yourself. You can't be someone else, right? That's important, because you can't play that role unless you're a really good actor. But I don't think you're going to have fun.
No. Yeah, be yourself. Absolutely. That's probably the number one advice, right? I mean, the people will listen if you're yourself, right? And they want to see that genuine personality, right? If they want to listen to Joe Rogan or somebody else, they'll listen to Joe Rogan, right? Like,
go for it.
Yeah, exactly. If that's your cup of tea, sure.
Yep, exactly. Well, Sean, unless you have another one more question talking about internal jokes here.
I'll have one more question, but I'll refrain from that. I'll make a comment instead, because I mean, all this time in the same industry, Tom and I have not met. And
I know,
Tom, it was an absolute pleasure meeting you today. And I don't know, maybe we should do another episode, you and I, and just get into some nitty gritty of technical bits, because I like the tech bits of cyber. So maybe we do one of those. But this was cool to kind of get your perspective on
Yeah.
14 plus years of doing this.
You have my blessing. Go deep in cybersecurity. Go nuts.
Mark will not be invited on that
Go
one.
nuts. I'm not
Oh,
going to
sounds great. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Thank you guys.
so that's to coming soon. A good conversation with you guys, maybe with someone else on the show too.
Sure.
We're going to be on probably redefining cybersecurity with Sean, and I'm very grateful for this conversation. I am honestly starting to think that this podcasting conversation is a really good idea because I'm having a good time.
I love
And
it.
so
Yeah.
I'm looking for other podcasters to come on. And in the meantime, Tom, thank you so much. Congratulations on 14 years of doing
Thank you,
this,
Marco.
and
Thank
many 10,000 more podcasts.
Let's hope. Yeah.
And sharesecurity.net, right? That's
Yep,
the
that's right.
website.
Yeah.
Awesome. And and again, I feel like everybody's bringing something to the community, either this community or another community. So I want to always be very supportive about other podcasts, and we're all in on this together. So thank you so much, Tom. Very much.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you, Sean. Really nice meeting you guys.
Great. And for everybody else, this is Audio Signals podcast on ITSP Magazine. There'll be notes. If you're watching the video, tell people they can listen to just the audio, your cup of tea, or if you're listening to the audio, go check the video, because we're not much to look at, but we were having fun. We were having fun.
That's right.
You get to see the parka hat.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
that's true.
Right.
And
I'm not bringing that again. That's a one shot.
That's one shot. It's one shot, one chance. All right. Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks.
We hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you learned something new and this story made you think, then share ITSP Magazine with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our columns. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.